I do want to turn our attention. We have a guest scheduled for this moment in this segment of the show. His name is Ken King. He is the president of the Homeowners Association of Hoover, and he joins us to discuss some Hoover elections, local municipal elections. Hello, Ken. How are you?
Morning. How are you?
Just give some folks a background on you and your involvement in the election process and why you're so interested in all of this.
Well, my wife and I live in Hoover, and we've lived here for over 10 years. And my wife, she bought the house. We got married a couple of years later. And one of the things that I noticed when we first moved in was property value. When we first moved into Hoover, we noticed how tremendous of a community it was to live in. Property values were soaring. The schools were being overfunded almost to capacity. I mean, schools were performing great. We were happy about our investment. And so I decided to tune in and plug in and make sure we preserve that and protect that money we put in our home. And so I became the Homeowners Association president. And since then, I've been very passionate about listening to what's happening with leaders in our city, staying tuned, staying informed, informing our members, making sure that we advocate on their behalf to make sure that their investment is protected.
Is that of all homeowners association? That's not just one neighborhood. That's everybody. That's the whole ball of wax in Hoover.
Yeah.
A lot of people.
No, absolutely. Now, there are multiple homeowners associations throughout the city of Hoover. My homeowners association is off Ross Bridge Parkway, a little community called Cottages of Deer Valley. There are multiple phases of it, representing about 500 homes total.
Gotcha.
So what are folks saying about my experience with the Hoover elections, and I admit my ignorance, is driving through Hoover and seeing the signs, the various city council races going on, and obviously the mayor's race. The two names, Gary Ivey, the incumbent, and Frank Brocado
Brocado,
pardon me. I see a lot of Brocado signs. I don't know if that's indicative of support. I don't know if that's indicative of where the race is necessarily, if it's particularly competitive.
Yeah.
Just give me a sense of the mayor's race.
Well, that's
primarily.
the thing. You know, people see signs, and I think part of the rationale behind yard signs is just create awareness. There is an election going on. It's not a national one. Oftentimes, local elections, people don't participate at the same degree they do national races. So when you see signs, I wish it was indicative of the number of folks that will show up and vote. Unfortunately, what I found following local elections for the last 10, 20 years is that it's not an indication, not a true indication. Turnout the last few municipal elections, for example, has been relatively low compared to national elections, sometimes 10, 15% of registered voters. So
that's interesting in Hoover, where folks, you would think, I don't know, you would think it would just be higher.
Yeah, I know. Hoover per capita has quite a few college-educated people, again, making good money, lots of kids in the schools.
Transportation to and from polls, everything you would need.
Absolutely. It's all relatively accessible. My precinct polling station is right down the road, and I could probably say that most people have that same accessibility to their polling stations. But it's not.
Relative to the success of the individuals that are part of your homeowners association or the individuals that live in Hoover, I have noticed, my experience is that municipal elections are decided more so by an individual's circumstances.
Right.
If I'm doing well in my family, then I feel like the city generally is doing well, and I'm more apt to stay the course. Is that the sense that you're getting in Hoover?
Well, that's interesting. Because what I'm finding, if you listen to the radio ads that I've heard from the mayor's office in particular, I've heard quite a few ads. I guess he has deeper pockets and probably can start running radio where some of the council presidents or council candidates don't have maybe the same type of resources, some of the challenges, right? So what I've heard is Hoover's great. It's fantastic. Couldn't be better. Schools are being funded adequately. Public safety is important, and, rah-rah, Siskumbah, let's go. Mm-hmm. Right. So what I found as I talk to homeowners, as I watch these issues, is that's actually not the case. But if you follow the schools issue right now, and it seems to be the singular issue in the city of Hoover election, right now the city of Hoover schools is completely unfunded, running deficit spending. Right now, when I say unfunded completely, I mean the city is providing about $2 million. And that may sound like a lot when I hear the mayor's ads. I hear, the schools are great, we're performing well, I just increased the level of funding towards schools. But what you don't understand, a lot of people don't understand, is that the reason that the schools have as much money in reserve they have now, of all people, of all places, it was the Jefferson County Commission about 10 years ago that voted to raise taxes in the city of Hoover. And so we have been, the school system when I talk about, we have been operating with some degree of reserve for the last 10 years, in part because of the Jefferson County Commission. Yes.
I have a question about that, though. And if you're outside of Hoover, you're going to be hard pressed. And I understand that you're saying there's a funding issue and it's going to become worse and worse. But when you look at Spain Park High School and you look at Hoover High School, they have the best of the best. I've been to events at those schools for my children. You're going to be hard pressed to get empathy out of me until you help me understand where this is going for those schools. Because it's kind of, it's known. They've got the money. They've got the massive schools. The football teams, everybody's funded and doing great. So that's not true? Or
That's
it won't
not
be
true.
true?
That is not true. So here's what if you take a deeper look and you start peeling the onion back, what you'll find is that the schools are growing. They're performing well. Football, academic programs, they're performing well. People love it. But it's a simple case of supply and demand. When you have schools that are growing the way they're growing, when you say schools are great in Hoover, obviously people want to move here. So every other week or so, there's a new development here, a new development there, and we are at capacity. And so with the budget cuts from the state, federal government, their cuts there, obviously, there is not enough money to go around. So what's happening as the schools continue to grow and expand and become more and more crowded, and we are welcoming in more and more development, adding new people to Hoover, populations growing, the schools are growing. The issue is that the city school system is basically at $13 million $13 million a month, their budget. And right now, they're operating about a $10 million deficit every single year. And so what I'm saying is that although you may see the fruit of the schools performing, if you go inside the classroom, if you talk to educators, if you talk to folks who are abreast of this issue, what you'll find is, no, that's not the case. We have to be more future-oriented.
So the Hoover School Board has been irresponsible in how they're budgeting their money?
What you'll find is the contrary. The Hoover City School Board has actually made tremendous cuts. They recently hired Dr. Murphy, which is by most accounts and by my recollection, what I've seen and studied about her, she is tremendous, and she has been very, very forward in coming up with ways to reduce, trim the fat, be more efficient, and she's laid out a very clear plan within the last several weeks about how to continue to increase our provide funding for the schools. She came up with 3 basic solutions. One was we need to continue taxes that are set to expire without increasing new taxes. We need to continue those, or either we need to continue to make drastic cuts. And when I talk about drastic cuts within the board, they have basically structured the entire system. You've heard the conversations about reducing or cutting school buses. If you were overfunded and things were well, I don't think we're having conversations about cutting school busing, reducing funding for arts programs, things of that nature. Teachers are not happy about the level of funding, and we see the writing on the wall, which essentially is if we don't do something now, the money that we have in reserve, the money we've been living off of the Jefferson County Commission basically provided for the city of Hoover's, that money runs out eventually. And we need someone who's not asleep at the wheel who basically can see the writing on the wall and begin to make those changes.
I'm just a little bit confused. I don't mean to belabor the point, but the schools were being funded adequately, and now they are not. And I'm trying to figure out what happened to create that. I mean, if they were being funded adequately and now they're not? Did a tax go away? Was money pulled from the school system and put elsewhere?
2007, 2008, the recession. When that happened, everybody began to pull back. People began
your tax base,
sales tax revenue.
Sales tax revenue began to decrease, and so
and then more people moving in. Is what you're saying.
So more people begin to move. Yeah.
Do you guys are you endorsing candidates, or what can you? What's your position on that?
My position with our HOA, we're not endorsing candidates. What we are is they've asked me to go out and advocate, ask questions, go to meetings, sit down, get information. Our board goes out and we bring information back to our homeowners. And what I found is a lot of the places that people are having these discussions about school funding, about the challenges that they face, about the city as a whole and the challenges they face, I'm only hearing one side of the issue, and that's unfortunate. When I say one side of the issue, I have been to multiple meetings, and I haven't run into the incumbent mayor. And
so you've only seen...
I've only seen Bricado. I've only seen...
And he's former fire chief, right?
Yes, right.
But you have not seen Gary Ivey.
I have not seen Gary Ivey at one single summer school planning budget conversation.
Have you reached out to him?
Not personally. I haven't reached out to him. I will say that they are annual State of the City talks at the country club typically or somewhere, and so I've gone to those. But outside of that, I have not had any real access. In fact, I've tried to reach out to some of the folks that work with him at the city, and I've been told that they haven't had, real staff meetings in terms of in a very long time. And so I do know.
And this election is soon.
I know, and so that's what's amazing to me is that when you see all the things that are at stake here, and and I can't seem to find the mayor at any of these conversations. I think he's one of the most important stakeholders, and I think that's very troubling to me and my homeowners.
Outside of the school issue,
yeah.
What comes to mind when I talk about Hoover politics? I mean, is that seems to be the central issue that you're addressing, but what else is there?
Well, outside of Hoover city school issue, we have a real problem with planning. And when I talk about planning, I remember a couple of years back, this guy ran for city council, did a fantastic job. I remember him asking the question that stuck with me was, show me the plan. And he asked the incumbent council members, show me the plan. Talk to the mayor, show me the plan for the city of Hoover. Show me where you want to be 10 years from now. And there was no plan. And so I realized that without a real plan, it's difficult to really, make preparations for budget shortfalls and make preparations for the influx of new students, make preparations for the influx of new people wanting to move here to the city of Hoover. And so planning became a real challenge. I think it's a real challenge here as a result of maybe a more hands-off approach to how we govern the city. And I think right now with the homeowners that I represent, they talk to me constantly about, Ken, $200,000 home, $500,000 home, $100,000 home. We need to protect and grow this investment. And we're starting to feel like that, the people that we trust to be able to help govern and guide and make sure that, the money that we put into our homes, the money we put into our businesses, the money that we put into our schools is a good investment. And right now people are feeling a little anxious about that investment because they don't see anyone at the wheel.
Well, rightly. I mean, when you experience the amount of growth, I mean, it's a good problem to have, but it's a problem you have to stay in front of, right? The
Absolutely.
Amount of growth that Hoover has had over the last 10 years or so.
Right, absolutely. And that's the issue is with a real plan. We've seen cities across the country what they can do when they sit down, when they partner with one another, when they show up and when they participate in conversations, when they engage people on a different level. We see what you can come up with when you work together. And I just don't see that now, and it's troubling to me. And that's the primary reason I wanted to come on the show this morning was to encourage folks. I know, national politics is exciting. There's a lot going on. But right now, what happens in the city of Hoover could more impact your own home than anything else that's happening nationally, in my opinion. And so I encourage folks, if you're not listening, you're not paying attention, you want to know more about what's happening with the school board issue, you want to know more about, what are the consequences of not having a real plan. If you want to know what's happening with public safety, and that becomes an obviously need as well as when people start moving to your city and the population continues to grow.
Sure.
I've been told, and I have no idea why this is the case, but you said something earlier that is reflective of other comments that I've heard throughout the city of Hoover when people say, hey, why aren't you talking about these elections are happening and we want to be responsive to these voices, right? I mean, that's part of the reason we're doing what we're doing on Talk 99.5 is to talk about issues like the Hoover municipal elections. The theme that I get from the mayor's race is that Gary Ivey is non-present. And I'm just telling you what I hear. That, okay. And you mentioned it, you reflected on it when you go to these meetings, when you go to these associations, that you don't see Gary Ivey there.
Right.
That's your experience?
No, absolutely. I mean, it's no secret. The mayor owns or runs Crush Cadillac. I applaud the success that he's had there. I think they do a fantastic job. I've brought my car in and have it serviced multiple times. I think it's fantastic. My only challenge with that, though, is it's being the mayor of Hoover is a full-time job. It's a $100,000 salary. And I think it's difficult. In my line of work, I can't have a $100,000 a year job on the side and still commit, my talent, my time, my resources to making sure I serve my clients. So for me, it's a challenge. It's a real conflict. And I think, the Hoover has done well for years. I think to some degree we've been on cruise control. I think we need a full-time mayor. I think we need someone who's okay with sitting down, talking with stakeholders. I think we need someone who's open with, obviously communicating well with the folks who live here, with the departments. Also, transparency has become a real issue for some of our homeowners. We watched recently, we talk about budget issues, and we watched recently the process for the $80 million sportsplex. Now, that is something to me, if we talk about, obviously the recession of 2008, that was difficult. We begin to tighten our belts. We cut school funding from, multiple, at least $10 million all the way down about 1, and now it's about 2.3. So we've done that. And so everything else, the funding for everything else has begin to increase. So we're going, okay, surely this is the year that we don't have to have a conversation about whether or not we cut school buses. Surely this is a year where the city increases it from 2% of the annual budget to 4% or 6% or something greater than it is.
You have to you have to walk slowly with me. I was publicly educated over in Georgia. The sportsplex, that's the thing that's about on Stadium Trace, right?
Right.
That it's, you said $80 million?
$80 million. $80 million. So how, my question.
Was that controversial?
It was. What was most controversial about the entire process was why was it done, so obscurely? We are tackling and we're having conversations about schools not being adequately funded. There's a false narrative, in my opinion, that's out there about if we provide more money for schools, then we have to cut, other important services. I just don't buy that narrative. And so if we are having that type of conversation in light or in lieu of an $80 million sportsplex, my question is, where are the priorities and how does that fit into the plan?
Has Hoover considered a lottery? Because that seems to be the one thing that's going to save Alabama. Just throwing that out there. You're welcome for that advice there.
You mentioned taxes that are expiring.
Yes.
Talk to me about that. What do you think?
Well, I mean, people are rightfully concerned about tax dollars being allocated, being increased. But as you know, we structure our school system based on taxes, whether it be property tax, sales tax. There are taxes that help fund public services. One of the challenges is that there are multiple taxes, but sometimes they expire. There may be a 2 mil sales tax that was created by this county or by that state agency or by the state or by local municipalities. And what happens over time, they expire. And so you have to put them back on the ballot and have them continued. And so the challenge here is with taxes expiring and to some degree city leadership asleep at the wheel, who is going to be the one to guide us back home?
You seem like an incredibly sharp guy, Ken. So I'm not going after you when I say this, but I do want to challenge something you said earlier, though. You said, this is just a continuation of an existing tax. It's not a new tax.
That's right.
No, it is a new tax, and this is why it is. When those taxes are sold at the ballot to the people of any given community, they are sold with an expiration date. So when the advocates for those taxes sell those taxes to the people, they say, this tax is going to happen for this duration of time, and it's going to expire. So if you sell it that way, on the front end, you have to accept that any continuation of that tax on the back end is a new tax.
Well, here's where I differ with you. The conversation, the whole totality of the conversation typically is we are assuming that certain things will happen between now and the time the tax expires. We are assuming we will have the type of leadership in place that will come up with long-term solutions that don't involve continuation of taxes or new taxes for that matter. When those conversations don't matter, it's not really done in a vacuum. We have to reevaluate. I would love not to have the Hoover City Schools basically being funded by the Jefferson County Commission's sales tax.
Yeah, and I'm not advocating one way or the other.
Right.
No,
I'm with you 100%. I think that's great. And again, that is my point really is that if the conversation is being had in a thoughtful, intentional, deliberative way where we really talk about the plan and how this tax increase or tax continuation works as a part of that plan, then it's awesome. But when the plan falls apart, then the money ends. So the million-dollar question then becomes, do we continue to cut, right? Do we continue to cut school fund, not school funding, but school services, school buses, arts, whatever, things of that nature? Do we raise taxes? I don't think that's a solution, unless you consider the continuation of tax. Sure. Or do we expect more funding and more support from our city? So, and when I talk about funding and support, I mean the support part is critical as well. We have to have those people at the table participating in those conversations. And I think it takes someone who is fully committed, working at least 40 hours a week to be able to take care of the city.
It's a perfect place to kind of launch into these municipal elections, Ken, and you're a well-spoken advocate for your city, and we certainly appreciate you being on to discuss some of these issues, and hopefully it's provoked some thought in people, maybe some Hooverites who have not considered the municipal elections thus far.